We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years, approximately 8 to 6 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a 3rd grade education would tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4.
President Biden, do you support reparations?
Well, I mean, since I haven't spoken on this, got a chance. Number one, the reason we're the country we are is because of immigration. We've been able to cherry pick the best from every single continent. The people who come here have determination, resilience. They are ready to stand up and work like the devil. We have 24 out of every 100 children in our school today is Hispanic. The idea that we are going to walk away and not provide every opportunity for them is that not only stupid and immoral, but it's bad for America. They are the future of America. Systemic racism that has plagued our nation for far, far too long. I said that over the course of the past year that the blinders have been taken off the nation, the American people. What many Americans didn't see or had simply refused to see couldn't be ignored any longer. Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took George Floyd's life opened the eyes of millions of Americans and millions of people around all over the world. It was the knee on the neck of justice, and it wouldn't be forgotten. And it's not white Americans' fault, but just a fact.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
We are owed $104 trillion on the very low end, plus $735 billion recurring. This number does not include the cost of about 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated, nor compound interest from 2017 when Sean D. Rochester's book, The Black Tax, was published, nor the cost of Black life, nor the cost of living increases, nor the war on drugs, nor the current day pandemic. The number I'm working with is for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives.
Good evening on the West Coast. Good evening in the Mountain. Good evening in the Central. Good evening on the East Coast. You know exactly who it is, family. Angela Nirvana, your hostess with the mostest on the Reparationist Perspective, bringing you those ADOCs, hot topics, and making the case for reparations, making the case for weaponizing our vote, socializing our suffering. And today, I want to welcome you one and all to this evening's rendition of Ida B. Wells Presents Anti-Black Racism. Tonight, I'm finally going to tell you the way I see it about the outcome of the Chauvin case. You know, it took the wind from my sails, family, when I know we have served as ADOCs so much time for less crimes than what Chauvin has recently got in terms of sentencing for literally executing Mr. George Floyd in the first degree. It was very intentional. I know that's not the charge he gave, okay, that he wasn't brought up on that as a charge, but it doesn't make it not true just because they didn't charge him with first degree murder. He literally executed Mr. George Floyd in cold blood. He literally lynched him with his knee in cold blood and, got 22 and a half years. So I put up on the screen how he got to live, how he's been living, how he will continue to live in solitary confinement. And oh, by the way, he can go free in 15 years on good behavior. So let's jump right into it. I'll stop sharing the screen so I can share with you the way I see it and the injustice of it all. We've got to keep our foot on the gas of these injuries against ADOCs to continue to make the case for ending qualified immunity and reparations and the like. I mean, all of ADOCs is on fire right now, and we are under the gun to prevent more of these types of misgivings in the injustice system, okay, where we are concerned as a people. So I'm going to jump right in. Will Chauvin's prison experience remain unusual? Okay. You know that he was sentenced to more than 22 years in prison for the murder of Mr. Floyd, but it's not clear yet what his experience will look like. He had an unusual start. Since his April conviction, Chauvin has been held at the state's only maximum security prison in Oak Park Heights. That's unusual. People don't typically go to a prison while waiting for sentencing. Chauvin is there for security reasons. Most state prisons have a unit to separate inmates from the general population for safety or security. But Oak Park Heights has what the Department of Correction calls Minnesota's most secure unit to separate individuals from others in the prison for disciplinary or security reasons. How does that unit operate? Photos provided by the state show an empty cell in that unit has white cinder block walls, slim rectangular windows, a metal toilet and sink, and a thin mattress on a fixed bed frame. I was scrolling through the pictures at the top of the show. When you compare it to the prisons that ADOCs have to suffer in for lesser offenses, our conditions are deplorable. These conditions comparatively feel more like a Holiday Inn in comparison. Okay? Chauvin has been kept there for security since his conviction, alone in a 10 by 10 foot cell that is monitored by corrections staff via camera and in-person checks. He has meals brought to his room and is allowed out for solitary exercise for an average of 1 hour a day. Department of Corrections spokeswoman Sarah Fitzgerald said Chauvin is allowed a maximum of 10 photos, a radio, and canteen food. He also can subscribe to periodicals and have 3 or fewer non-contact visits each week. She said prison also uses a paid system that allows people to receive emails which are printed out and provided to the recipient. What next? Fitzgerald said Chauvin returned to the unit at the maximum security prison following his sentencing on Friday. She said his ultimate placement hasn't been determined, but his safety will be our predominant concern when determining final placement. With good behavior, Chauvin could get out on parole after serving 2/3 of his sentence, or about 15 years. For executing and Adoc's brother in cold blood. Now let's juxtapose this to what happened to the teen Myon Burrell, who Amy Klobuchar locked away. He had to spend 18 years before she called for a second investigation after being shamed on the campaign trail when she was running for president. On the debate stage, she was very smug and felt satisfied in her arrest of Mr. Burrell, who, oh, by the way, there was no gun, no DNA, no nothing. And the people that actually killed the young girl who was doing homework, it was a stray bullet from some type of shootout that hit the young lady while she was doing homework. They told them that Mr. Burrell was not even present when it happened. These were his buddies, but he wasn't present. So with no evidence, he got to spend, as a teen, 18 years in jail. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the injustice in this crackpot would-be justice system. There's no justice, no peace for us. Now let's talk about it. Minnesota juvenile lifer. He was sentenced to life in prison for a murder he had no role in. Minnesota juvenile lifer walks free after 18 years in prison. This is an article dated December 14 last year, 2020. This is from the pressure, people. I keep letting you know, as ADOS, freedmen and women, sons and daughters of freedmen, that politicians respond to pressure, not applause. And we put in pressure all over the country on Klobuchar to reopen this investigation. Let's talk about the puckery involved. Had she not been running for president and not felt that pressure while on the campaign trail, Mr. Burrell would still be in jail. But Glacier Donkey Chauvin can execute Mr. George Floyd while the cameras roll and be very smug about it and not take his knee off of Mr. George Floyd's neck until the paramedics ask him, can you please get up? The man's already expired. Can you please get up so we can put him on a gurney? Gets 22 years in what is considered a 5-star prison experience in solitary confinement for security reasons, and can walk in 15 years for good behavior. I don't know how you can have misconduct behavior. Took his first steps of freedom to the sound of ringing bells and cheering family members and supporters hours after a pardons board commuted his sentence in a high-profile murder case. Myon Burrell's prosecution and harsh punishment raised questions about the integrity of the criminal justice system that put him away nearly 2 decades ago for the death of a young girl killed by a stray bullet. Earlier this year, the Associated Press and APM reports uncovered new evidence and serious flaws in the police investigation, ultimately leading to the creation of an independent national legal panel to review the case. Last week, this was December last year, the panel published its findings saying there was a failure to investigate that illustrates tunnel vision and that evidence that could have helped exonerate Burrell was either ignored or minimized. The panel said it saw no purpose served by keeping Burrell locked up, pointing to his age at the time of the crime and his good behavior behind bars. Burrell's request for a pardon was denied, and he will have to spend the next 2 years under supervised release. But it was the first time in at least 22 years that Minnesota commuted a sentence in a murder case, according to the Department of Corrections. The release was swift. Just hours after receiving the news, he walked out the front door of Stillwater Prison into below freezing temperatures. Dozens of bundled supporters, some holding signs and balloons, surrounded Burrell while cheering, "Myon's free, Myon's free." After jumping into a waiting car, he was soon home. Friends and relatives filtered into the living room, greeting him with gifts and hugs. "It's just a blessing," he said, while standing outside on the street, searching the sky for the moon and stars, which he said he's been longing to see. Burrell has always maintained his innocence in the 2002 killing of 11-year-old Tyesha Edwards, struck in the heart while doing homework at the dining room table with her little sister. He told Minnesota's Board of Pardons members, Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison, that his heart goes out to her family. The third board member, Supreme Court Chief Justice Lori Skirvin Geldia, recused herself, citing prior involvement with the case. Edwards' death enraged the African-American community in a city just emerging from some of the nation's highest homicide rates, briefly earning it the nickname Murderapolis. Senator Amy Klobuchar, who then headed the county attorney's office, has used Burrell's conviction over the years as an example of her tough on crime policies, most recently during a Democratic presidential primary debate last year. The AP investigation that followed sparked national outrage and gave Burrell's family and community organizers the ammunition they needed to get Klobuchar's attention. She called for the creation of the independent panel of legal experts after defending her bullshit on the debate stage. Oh yeah, she went in hard. She was very smug about having put this young teenager away for a murder he had no role in. But that pressure on that campaign trail and that desire to win the presidency forced her. It forced her to give this thing a second look. That's what it took. Oh my God. The AP investigation that followed, she called for the creation of the independent panel of legal experts. Barry Scheck, co-founder of the Innocence Project, and Laura Neryder of Northwestern University Center on Wrongful Convictions oversaw that effort. Klobuchar released a statement Tuesday saying the pardon board made the right decision. This is what I keep telling y'all about the Democrats. They want to create the problems and then want your vote to be the solution. She also urged the Conviction Review Unit to continue investigating the facts. The year-long investigation by the AP showed there was no hard evidence, no gun, no DNA or fingerprints tying Burrell to the shooting. Among other things, police did not collect the corner store's surveillance video, which Burrell said could have cleared him. And video footage showed the lead homicide detective offering a man in the police custody $500 for Burrell's name, even if it was just hearsay. Officers relied heavily on a single eyewitness who offered conflicting accounts, along with jailhouse informants who benefited generously for testifying. Some have recanted. One had his 16-year prison sentence cut to 3. Another said he had agreed to work with police on 14 other cases. Burrell's co-defendant said the teenager was not at the scene that day. One of them, Isaiah Tyson, has been saying for years that he was the shooter, not Burrell. Oh, I will always carry the burden of what happened to an innocent child, Tyson said Tuesday during a call from prison where he's serving a 45-year sentence for Taisha's killing. But by him being let go, it's a huge relief for me because I've been holding that this whole time. He was locked up for something he had no idea about. They sentenced him to life and gave the glacier donkey Chauvin 22 and a half years. And that's why you haven't seen me in a few days. The injustice of it all. It just does something to me. This laid me out that this man didn't get the max 40 years. I was blown away. And then to see the conditions in which he's being coddled in prison. Not doing time in general population. Where we have to fight for our lives on a regular basis. Between the rapes and the abuse. Rest in power, Khalif Browder. That's the conditions for nonviolent offenses. Khalif Browder was thrown into a maximum security prison for being falsely accused of stealing a backpack. He's no longer with us. He took his life once he was freed because of the emotional and physical abuse he suffered as a young man in a maximum security prison. While Glacier Donkey Chauvin gets 22 and a half years and can walk in 15 for good behavior in solitary confinement in what comparatively is a 5-star hotel as compared to the conditions in which our brothers, many of whom are locked up for nonviolent offenses, have to suffer through. So I just had to take a time out because this story was hard to do. And I had to decide what angle was I going to approach it. And I had to really meditate on, why am I so irked by this? Why does this feel like a huge injustice for ADOCs at large, and in particular, Mr. George Floyd? They are literally rearresting a 77-year-old woman for not calling into her parole office timely because she was on a computer training and missed making the phone call or missed accepting the call. She's headed back to jail. 40% of the people that had to go back to prison is due to the broken parole system. They've got all these rules in place to catch you in a trick bag to reinstate you into prison. And no assistance coming out. What do they release you with? $25, $40? And the clothes on your back? This is happening predominantly to ADOCs. And I'm here to report on it. Burrell, who was 16 at the time of the slaying, appeared at his hearing via video conference from inside the state Stillwater prison. He became emotional as the board voted and put his hand on his head and said, "Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it." Burrell told the board about his time in prison, saying he did not know what was going on when he was sentenced and that he converted to Islam and became a religious leader while behind bars. "I tried to make the best of my situation," he said. "I started going in and extracting medicine out of the poison. The trials and tribulations I was going through, I tried to get something out of it." His request was accompanied by testimony from community leaders and letters from young men in prison who attested to his strong character and moral leadership. Jimmy Edwards III, Taisha's brother, told the AP that he and his family were upset by the decision. He said the justice system failed his family, and media coverage and support for Burrell's release overshadowed his sister's death. Quote, she never got to go to her prom. She never got to go to college. She never got to go to junior high school or high school, he said. Her life was taken away at 11. Who's the victim? Well, sir, ma'am, family. At 11 years old, I don't think she would have wanted Mr. Myon Burrell to do life in prison for a murder he wasn't even present to commit. Get over yourselves. My deepest sympathy for your loss, but seriously, why in the world would you want this young man to spend life in prison for a murder of your sister, daughter, cousin that he did not commit? Due to the nefarious ways of the glacier donkey, white inferior race soldiers. Why should he have to do time? Let's move on. Okay, Amy Klobuchar helped to jail the teen for life, but the case was flawed. Welcome to the live. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, turn on your notifications. I get so into this stuff. Hi, y'all. Y'all, I had to take a breather on this one. I just could not. I couldn't. It's taken me this long to try to formulate this show. I had to talk to God about it. It was too much. What's up, Trey X? I see you, family. Brian Johnson, Herb St. Wyvok Info. Thank you guys for joining the live. I'll be back over to talk about how y'all see it. I was in my feelings, y'all. I'm sorry. I just couldn't. I had to take a time out. Some politicians have tried to distance themselves from the period's perceived excesses. In January, for instance, Klobuchar returned a $1,000 campaign donation from Linda Fairstein, who prosecuted New York's infamous Central Park Five. They all worked together. The prosecution, the judges, the police, to undo ADOX because they neutralized us economically, and now they're coming for the vote. Back to the text. She returned that $1,000 from Linda Fairstein, who prosecuted New York's infamous Central Park Five, 4 black teens and 1 Hispanic, who were later exonerated in the rape of a white jogger in 1989. And this is what I've been telling people all day as I celebrate the release of Bill Cosby. This is what I've been telling them. Listen, with these white inferior glacier donkeys, you've got to believe 10% of what you see and none of what you hear. This trick, whom everybody is still, well, not all, some people are saying he raped. He allegedly raped her and she went to have sex and to see him 19 additional times. We're talking over a Benadryl. Mr. Cosby had to go and sit in prison. I can't speak to what he did or did not do. But what I do know is they broke the law in order to convict him. That's what was wrong. As you see Epstein and Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and Charlie Sheen and all these white men get away with the very thing he was convicted for after settling out of court 15 years ago, however long ago. So she gets to blow through that money and bring him up on new charges. They break the law in order to get him convicted because they don't like to see accomplished, successful, financially well-established Black men. So these white inferior glacier donkey women in particular will cry rape even when they're sleeping on the casting couch. A lot of this is retaliation from the Me Too movement because you thought laying on your back was going to get you to come up in Hollywood. You found out otherwise, and now it's dawn rape. There were women who were paid off to accuse Cosby. Janice Dickerson admitted in her book that she lied on Cosby because they all was into drugging and orgies. But they will change the laws for a conviction of a successful Black man. That's what they'll do. While campaigning to be the top prosecutor in Minnesota's most populous county in 1998, Klobuchar advocated for harsher penalties for juvenile offenders. What's different with Biden right now? In that $350 billion crime bill. I'm not going to get into that show. I'm going to save that for tomorrow. But what's different? The author of the 94 crime bill has come up with an easier way to tell you with $350 billion in the era of George Floyd and defund the police, he gives them $350 billion more dollars. Where do you think they're going? In the white neighborhoods to start executing them with impunity? Or will they remain in the poor ADOX communities to continue to execute us with impunity, especially given that we still don't have a George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to end qualified immunity? We still don't have the Emmett Till anti-lynch bill made into law. That's been 100 years. But y'all want to keep voting this hot damn blue no matter who, right? Let me keep going. So I can get out of here. I promised my baby I wasn't going to go over no hour. Thank you, one and all, for your contributions to my voice in the new Black media. It's because of y'all that I feel like going on, okay? The commendations in Facebook, in my text, in my email. You guys are the wind beneath my wings and why I keep showing up. Just know that, because this, I can't imagine what Ida B. Wells must have felt like. This can weigh on you spiritually. So when y'all see me disappear, I'm growing through and trying to collect myself before I get in front of y'all. But the struggle is real. But it must be told. The revolution is being social mediaized. Because they're not talking about this on CNN. They're not talking about the way we feel about it. So if I feel some kind of way, I entrust that you guys feel some kind of way. So I got to tell it. So she campaigned to be the top prosecutor in Minnesota's most populous county in 98. She advocated for harsher penalties for juvenile offenders. In Minnesota, allegations of gang affiliation or motive played on the fears of mostly white jurors and led to harsher sentences. Quote, if you were young and Black and your case was tied to gangs or drugs, you know the war on crime from Nixon, Reagan, which is the war on Black. We're going to talk about that another show. It was an especially scary time, said Mary Moriarty, a public defender in Minnesota's Hennepin County for nearly 3 decades. Quote, I do firmly believe that there were people convicted of crimes that they did not do. Isn't that happening all over the country with ADOX men? If they didn't remove the black men by way of the welfare system, they'll take them off the streets or starve the communities of resources and sit back and scratch their balls over why there's so much crime, black on black crimes and murders. You starve them of resources. You starve them of everything to make them American. And then you scratch your balls as to why there's so much black on black crimes and murder. Which is not unakin to what was happening with the Italians before they were made white, with the Irish before they were made white. Anybody that starved the resources turns on each other. But Biden's answer is $350 billion more to the race soldiers. Not education, not jobs, not housing, not businesses. Not an American wage. More militarization of the police in our communities. Okay, back to the text. She said that the murder Burrell went down for was problematic from the start. In the case of Myon Burrell, where you had a really high-profile shooting of an innocent girl, and you put a lot of pressure on the system to get someone to be responsible for that, I think a lot of corners were probably cut. Not probably. In Minneapolis, soaring homicides had briefly earned the city the grim nickname Murderapolis. By the time Klobuchar took office in '99, crime rates had started to drop, but tensions remained high. Taisha's death set off an uproar. Police pulled out all stops, deploying more than 40 officers and gang task force members. Despite the lack of physical evidence, they all but wrapped up their case against Burrell in 4 days. Ike Tyson, 21, and Hans Williams, 23, were easy. Several people saw them roll by in their car minutes before the attack, and a 9/11 tip from one of their girlfriends helped seal the deal. Burrell, then 16, was arrested only after a tip from an often used jailhouse informant. You mean the one that they reduced his sentence and gave him $500? During his lengthy legal process, Burrell hired and fired 6 attorneys as they failed to cross-examine witnesses, pursue alibis, or challenge glaring irregularities in the investigation. In the end, his sentence stuck. Natural life in prison, while Chauvin gets 22 and a half years and can walk in 15 for good behavior in solitary confinement in a plush 5-star prison. The Minneapolis police declined to comment for this story. Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman's office said it's confident the correct person was convicted, but it's always open to reviewing new evidence. You didn't even review or put anybody on the stand for the existing evidence. Assistant County Attorney Gene Burrell, the only prosecutor left who was directly involved in the case, insists that Burrell receive justice. I'll tell you what I've told a lot of people over the years. I have a lot of confidence in Minnesota's justice system, she said. Certainly he's been through the court process and his conviction has remained intact. Went through 6 lawyers, y'all. This is what happens when you're neutralized economically. You can't afford proper representation. For years, many caught up in Burrell's case have insisted police got the wrong person. Some say they initially lied to protect themselves or their friends. Others say they told police what they wanted to hear to get deals on their own sentencing or to punish a rival. How is this legal? Even though some have changed their stories more than once, they insist they are now telling the truth because they have nothing to gain. Burrell's co-defendants were members of the Tyson mob and the Vice Lords. They say drugs and guns were a way of life in their rough neighborhood, but this shooting wasn't gang warfare, as police claim. They insisted it was personal. Tyson said he and Williams were driving in South Minneapolis when they spotted a group of guys hanging out. Among them was 17-year-old Timmy Oliver, a member of the rival gangster Disciples, who had menacingly waved a gun at them weeks earlier. The pair slowed down, scowled at Oliver, then continued on. They picked up an unidentified acquaintance, got a gun, and headed back. Tyson said it was his idea, and the intention was to scare Oliver, not to kill him. The three parked a block away, with Williams waiting in the driver's seat for a quick getaway. Tyson and the third man jumped out, cutting through an alley and ducking between houses. Shielded by a wall, Tyson said he could clearly see Oliver standing in the yard across the street with his back turned. He said he fired off 8 rounds, the last few as he was running backward toward the car. It wasn't until later that evening that he learned one of his bullets killed Taisha in the house next door. Quote, "There was only one weapon, one set of shells," said Tyson. "I'm the one that did this. I did this." Soon after the shooting, he was telling friends, his attorney, fellow inmates, and even a prison guard that Burrell was not at the scene, court records show. But he said his lawyer told him he'd never see the outside of a prison unless he implicated the youth. Why aren't these people in jail? Why isn't everyone complicit in this young boy's being sentenced to life for a murder he did not commit under the jail? His lawyer told him he'd never see the outside of a prison unless he implicated the youth. Eventually he buckled, but only after being promised his plea would not be used against Burrell. Tyson doesn't want to name the other man who was with him, saying he doesn't want to pull in a person who was only peripherally involved. But you were convinced to throw Burrell, 16 years old, under the bus. But the person who was actually there, you don't want to talk about. The getaway driver, Hans Williams, did identify a third man by his full name in a photo lineup. Police initially said they didn't want to muddy up the case with an unverified name. Later, that they didn't believe him. They made no real effort to follow up. After getting a denial from the suspect in 2005, the chief homicide detective permanently checked out their recorded conversation and gave it to the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. It has since conveniently gone missing. The gun was never recovered. An officer said prints on the magazine and the car were not sufficient for identification. Ballistic tests on Tyson's jacket were not carried out to verify claims that he was a triggerman. The killings of Taisha Edwards topped the television news that night. That's how a prison inmate first heard about it. Desperate to get money or time cut off his own sentence, he quickly reached out to Oliver, a friend and fellow gang member. Minutes later, the often used informant gave the cops Burrell's name, helping steer their investigation, the AP found. "18 years. And Amy Klobuchar. Amy Klobuchar is responsible. They like to create the problems amongst our people and want our votes to be the solution while doing nothing for our social justice and economic inclusion. So let's talk about, I want to talk about, hold on. I want to talk about George Floyd's trifling ass mama. Hold on, let me pull it up. And then I want to talk about Darnella Frazier. Derek Chauvin's mother breaks silence. My son is a good man. Oh my God. She gave a lengthy statement defending his character and pleading for mercy from the courts Friday during his sentencing hearing for Mr. Floyd's murder, marking the first time the public has heard from a member of his family. She gave birth to a savage. She raised a savage. She says he's played over and over in his head the events of that day. I've seen the toll it has taken on him. I believe a lengthy sentence will not serve Derek well. When you sentence my son, you will also be sentencing me. You raised this glacier donkey to be a murderer. And all you're concerned about is how light his sentence needs to be because it's taking a toll on him. While Pulitzer was Chauvin's only witness, the prosecution called to the stand multiple members of Floyd's family who all asked the court to give Chauvin the maximum penalty of 30 years in prison without parole. The court heard from Floyd's 7-year-old daughter, Gianna, who said in a video message she missed her father. Chauvin had no regard for human life. And this woman sat up here and tried to make us believe that this was a good man. Chauvin's mother offered her first okay. She said that while she's never spoken publicly, I have always supported him 100% and always will. She defended Chauvin as quiet, thoughtful, honorable, and a selfless man, criticizing what she described as an unjust characterization of him by the media, public, and prosecution team. My son's identity has been reduced to that as a racist. I want this court to know that none of these things are true and that my son is a good man. She defended his work as a police officer, saying he dedicated his life and time to the police department and would call in to see if they needed help on his days off. You want to know why, family? In the 22 years he served on the force, he attempted to kill choke on 8 other occasions that he should have been convicted of, which is why he only got 22 and a half years, because they could bill this as his first offense. Because he got off for the other 19 complaints, 8 of which were kill choke practices. At one point, Pulitzer turned and spoke directly to Chauvin. I have always believed in your innocence and will never waver from that. So you can see your son be dismissive to all of the bystanders who said you're killing him and comment, uh-huh. You can watch your son do something that heinous, that egregious, that savage to another human being, and you can look at him in court and say, I have always believed in your innocence and will never waver from that. Literally take Mr. Floyd's life before children, young adults, and seniors, professionals who want to help, When the martial arts expert called you out on what you were doing, you looked at him and said, uh-huh. But you believe in his innocence? Let's talk about Darnella Frazier and why what she did is bittersweet. And I say that because, family, is this what it's going to take for us to get a modicum of justice? Somebody literally has to be traumatized to catch the white inferior glacier donkey race soldiers in the act of murdering us before we can get any justice. And I want to talk about the young people in Atlanta that were taping the race soldiers during the George Floyd protest and got snatched from their cars and tased and beaten to a pulp and then thrown in jail. Because what she did was very risky. What they all did was very risky. It could have cost them their lives. Darnella Frazier, teen who recorded George Floyd's murder, awarded Pulitzer Prize Special Citation. The teenager who recorded the infamous video showing George Floyd's murder at the hands of Minneapolis police was awarded a 2021 Pulitzer Prize Special Citation on Friday. Darnella Frazier won the citation for courageously recording the murder of George Floyd, a video that spurred protests against police brutality around the world, highlighting the crucial role of citizens in journalists' quest for truth and justice. According to the Pulitzer Prize Board, had she not been there, family, had every last bystander not been strategically placed there by the Most High, by the God in them, the Minneapolis Police Department was fully prepared to cover this annihilation of Mr. George Floyd all the way up. The award comes with a monetary prize consistent, at least with the other prizes, $15,000, according to Edward Clement, a spokesperson for the Columbia University Pulitzer Prize organization. Previous special citations have been awarded to Ida B. Wells, Aretha Franklin, and Duke Ellington. Wow. I'm sure if she had a choice, she would rather not this award for what she had to mentally and spiritually go through to watch Mr. Floyd have his life taken from the glacier donkey race soldier Chauvin. I'm sure that she would prefer Mr. Floyd be alive and she not have to live through this every day of her life, sleeping and awake. The trauma that our people have been through under the oppressive boot of institutional systemic racism is unconscionable. Former police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty of all counts. We all know that. Frazier's video was a key piece of evidence in the trial, from opening statements through closing arguments. Frazier, then 17, was visiting the store that Memorial Day with her 9-year-old cousin when she saw Chauvin and several other officers restraining Floyd on the ground. She recorded the incident on her cell phone as she and other bystanders pleaded with them to get off of Mr. Floyd, who repeatedly said he couldn't breathe. Frazier's video of the incident went viral, drawing attention to Floyd's death and ultimately propelling thousands of protests against police brutality across the U.S. and abroad. It's a little easier now, but I am not who I used to be. A part of my childhood was taken from me, Frazier wrote in a statement posted to her Facebook page last month on the anniversary of Floyd's murder. A lot of people call me a hero, even though I don't see myself as one, she wrote. I was just in the right place at the right time. And might I add, she allowed her inner God to use her in a magnanimous way to get a modicum of justice for Mr. George Floyd. Behind this smile, behind these awards, behind the publicity, I'm a girl trying to heal from something I am reminded of every day. In December, she was awarded the 2020 PEN Berinson Courage Award from Oscar-winning director Spike Lee. PEN America, the literary and human rights organization, honored Frazier along with other activists, artists, and former President Barack Obama. What for? Didn't he start like 8 more wars during his tenure and did absolutely nothing for ADOX? Okay, so the other 3 police officers accused in Floyd's murder won't stand trial until March of next year. When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad, I look at my brothers, I look at my cousins, my uncles, Frazier said at the time. She says she has stayed up some nights apologizing to George Floyd for not doing more and not physically interacting and not saving his life. But she said, it's not what I should have done. It's what he, Glacier Donkey Chauvin, should have done. Glacier Donkey being my word. 3 other Minneapolis officers accused of aiding and abetting in Floyd's murder will stand trial in March 2022. So a federal case against them can first go forward. A judge ruled last month. Thank you, Darnella Frazier. So this last read, I want to talk about how young people were attacked in Atlanta. Hold on, guys. I have to pull it up. Two students sue over use of taser. Arrests by Atlanta police during the protest. Because they were doing what? Recording the abuses of the race soldiers. Tanaya Pilgrim says she's still in pain both physically and emotionally after she and another Atlanta college student were tased and arrested by a group of police officers in Atlanta last summer. The young man went to Morehouse. The young lady went to Spelman. The anxiety that night brings me every day. The nightmares that I still had to experience every single night. It's like life took a total turn for something that we didn't ask to be involved with, she said. For Messiah Young, the pain seems to manifest in a different way. He spoke softly Thursday as he reflected on the incident that resulted in him being in handcuffs while an officer pointed a gun at him. I know the pain that they go through and continue to go through, and accountability is what relieves pain and brings peace, said attorney Mawuli Davis, who is representing Young. And unfortunately, there has been no accountability. What you doing down there, Keisha Applebottoms? Not a hot damn thing. The demand for accountability, Davis said, is what has driven Pilgrim and Young to file a lawsuit against the city of Atlanta. The 21 and 23-year-old announced a lawsuit Thursday morning during a news conference with their legal teams. Named in the suit alongside the city of Atlanta are Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and the individual officers involved in the arrest, including Ivory Streeter, Mark Gardner, Lonnie Hood, Armand Jones, Willie T. Sauls, and Ronald Claude. Davis said the city has failed to take responsibility for the impact the encounter had on the two college students' chronic physical pain that Pilgrim said she now has to tend to regularly. A laceration that required nearly 20 stitches for Young, and anxiety and emotional scars borne by them both. We felt we were going to die. The lawsuit also includes Atlanta Police Department officers Carlos Smith, Stephen McKessie, Sheldon Drinkard, and 10 anonymous officers deemed John Doe officers who, according to documents, were nearby while the other officers deployed their tasers and, despite being in a position to intervene, chose to stand by and watch without making any effort to stop the obvious use of excessive force. Six of the Atlanta police officers were fired and charged following the incident, which Bottoms then called a clear use of excessive force. Two have since had their terminations overturned. Body camera footage of the incident showing the officers trying to pull Young from the car, which is stopped in the middle of the street, was widely circulated. Quote, for these young people to have this video out and to have to live with this for the rest of their lives is unthinkable. But we are here to hold the city and all of those involved accountable, Davis said. The incident happened as people across the city were protesting the death of George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis. Floyd's death renewed anger about the treatment of African Americans by police and spurred demonstrations throughout the nation. While most of the demonstrations were peaceful in Atlanta, a May 29 protest evolved into chaos and mayhem. Looters burned police cars, smashed their way into stores, and left shattered glass in their wake. The visitor center in Centennial Olympic Park was left torched, and the CNN Center was defaced. The following day, Bottoms put a curfew in place to prevent additional violence or property damage. Protests continued the next day, and for the second night in a row, violence broke out at Centennial Park. Pilgrim, a student at Spelman College, and Young, who attends Morehouse, were driving near the park as the demonstration was taking place. According to attorney L. Chris Stewart, the young couple had been out on a date looking to grab a bite to eat when they became stuck in the traffic of police diverting drivers and pedestrians from the park, the attorney previously said. Traffic was at a standstill when Hood approached the couple's car and told Young to get out of the area, the complaint said. Upon observing that there were no pedestrians in front of him and that the vehicle ahead of him had moved forward a few yards, Young complied with Hood's commands and moved his vehicle forward a few yards to close the small gap between the vehicle in front of him, but due to heavy traffic was again forced to stop, the lawsuit said. When the 2017 Mazda came to a stop, the 6 officers surrounded it on both sides and began yelling at Pilgrim and Young, according to the complaint. Pilgrim frantically complied when Hood commanded her to open her car door, the document said. As Hood told Pilgrim to get out, Gardner deployed his taser on her, according to the complaint. As she convulsed, Hood pulled out his own taser and deployed it on her, it said. Cloud shattered the driver's side window with a window punch while Street shot his taser at Young through the shattered glass, according to the complaint. At some point, Jones began trying to pull Young out of the driver's side of the car while Hood was trying to remove the Morehouse student through the passenger side. So they're literally playing tug of war with the Morehouse man. During what Stewart called the tug of war between officers over Young's body, another officer yelled out that the man had a gun. Jones then pulled out his service weapon and pointed it at Young. Quote, "There was no gun. There was no weapon. There wasn't even mace. There was nothing," Stewart said. Yet he screamed multiple times from a distance, "He's got a gun," which could have gotten these kids killed. Both Pilgrim and Young were taken into custody. Young was accused of several charges, including eluding police. All of the charges were dropped the following day. Pilgrim was held against her will for 4 hours without a mask in a police van with others during the height of COVID, said Stewart, who was representing her. She was never charged with a crime. The complaint said that in enacting the curfew, Bottoms gave Atlanta police officers free rein to use excessive force against citizens who were committing no crime on May 30th, 2020, so long as doing so was incidental. The lawsuit also claims the curfew was unconstitutional, calling it overboard and unenforceable, and stating that it was applied to all people in the city limits without regard of if they were part of a large gathering of people. It failed to provide fair notice to APD officers or citizens regarding the scope of the curfew and its prohibitions, including but not limited to the particular locations where the curfew applied and whether the curfew prohibited citizens from traveling through the city in a vehicle. The lawsuit asked for punitive damages for both students and for their legal fees to be covered. It also asked that the officers be tried before a jury. You would think there would be some sort of reform or change at this point, Young said, adding that every day reminds him of something from that night last year. In a statement, the city said that it has not been served with any such lawsuit. Therefore, we are unable to comment on any potential pending litigation. Atlanta police naturally declined to comment on the lawsuit. They've been served, liars that they are. Family, let's see what you got to say about it before I pray us out. Brian says 22 and a half years for a videotape murder. Kalantre Barefoot was given 45 for killing a dog. A police dog. Brian says Chauvin is also negotiating a plea deal on the pending federal charges. He goes on to say, if you want to know what these politicians are all about, follow the paper trails of their sponsors. Amen to that. Trey X says Andrea Constant admitted that Bill Cosby didn't drug her, but lied on the stand saying that he did. He goes on to say, if black people kill someone, it's 40 years to life, but Derek Chauvin gets 22 and a half years in prison. Shaking my head, wow, with 15 years for good behavior. Brian says on Chauvin's mother, like the saying goes, it starts in the home. Raised soldiers are born and raised every minute. Where's the lie? Chauvin mom saying that he's not a racist. Yeah, okay. Shaking my head, says Trey X. Brian says he was a good man while having only 19 other complaints behind this one, a murder. Family, we've got so much work to do. If you'd like to give testimony at the next reparations hearings here in California for AB 3121, email me at therepperspect@gmail.com. therepperspect@gmail.com. Okay. Also, we've got a couple of marches planned They're talking about a Voter Rights Act march. We're going to crowbar our way. We're discussing crowbarring our way into that march to make a case for reparations at that march. And then we got some talks brewing of a million person reparations march in October. So be in touch if you'd like to participate, if you'd like to support, if you'd like to give a hand. The repperspect@gmail.com. I'll put it in the chat. Thank you guys, one and all, for joining me here on the live. I'll see you guys tomorrow at around 6 o'clock. Tonight, I was a little late because we're in our senior year and had to speak with my daughter's counselor, and it went over a little bit. So forgive me for that. But around 6-ish, you can expect me tomorrow with more of As the World of ADOX Turns. And with that said, family, I'd like to pray us out, that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever ADOX and its allies are, God truly is, because, family, you are the face of God. You are the voice of God. You are the body temple of the Spirit of the living God. And with that said, family, you make it a beautiful, God-inspired rest of your evening until tomorrow night. Know that I love you black. I love you strong. Peace.